we can think of emerging technologies in two ways. We can think of emerging technologies as technologies which are at an early proof of principle stage. An alternative way of thinking about emerging technologies for the military are those are technologies which are more mature, but for which the military has found a new and novel use. I think it's very important when we think about emerging technologies to make a distinction between technologies and fielded weapon systems or equipment. A technology such as nanotechnologies, for instance, which are mentioned for many potential uses, including in sensors, there's a very long and winding path from an emerging technology to its fielding in military equipment. And in terms of examples of the impact of emerging technologies, a good example from history is Blitzkrieg. So Blitzkrieg brought together a number of technologies, some of which were emerging, including radio, and they brought them together critically with organizational changes, with innovations in doctrine to produce a new way of fighting battles, wars. Clearly, the uncertainty that surrounds emerging technologies is one of the key problems that decision makers face. And that uncertainty comes from a variety of different means, including, of course, the technology itself, as well as the emergence of other technologies that may prove to be better, cheaper, quicker to field than the technology that we have in mind. Decision makers can deal with that uncertainty, I would contend, in several different ways. First of all, you invest in a portfolio of technologies. You don't put all your eggs in a single basket. In these budgetary times and the constraints of defense budgets, both in the US but particularly in Europe, that becomes increasingly difficult. There is a danger if one invests across a portfolio that you are investing too little to make a difference, to make an impact in any one field. So this is an ongoing debate, I would contend, within the defense science technology community. I would also say in a very different way that decision makers should be very careful to make their own independent assessments of the potentials of emerging technologies. There are people who have a vested interest in particular emerging technologies. It may be the academics who've staked their career on that emerging technology. It may be the entrepreneurs and the startup companies who see it as a way of gaining access to government funding to develop those technologies. It may be people in think tanks who need to sell books and fill workshops and conferences. So there are vested interests in particular technologies. There is often, consequently, what one might call a conspiracy of optimism around certain technologies, and decision makers really have to find ways of coming to clear-eyed decisions about the potential of the whole range of emerging technologies. A concern for many in the national security environment is indeed the globalization of technology. So the old certainties around security of supply of certain technologies, of having perhaps exclusive access to particular new and important emerging technologies, those kind of certainties that we saw in the early stages of the Cold War are no longer the case. These emerging technologies in many of the fields that I mentioned in my talk, they're coming from a whole variety of sources. They're coming out of startup companies, they're coming out of universities, they're coming from people's garages. And those people are not necessarily in the UK or the United States. I would contend, however, that the national security threat is as much about not accessing those technologies wherever they reside. The business for defence companies, those involved in defence laboratories in the future is about how you can actually bring these technologies together wherever they come from, bring them together in smart ways that distinguish the military capability that the US, that the UK has, from military capability that may be able to emerge in other parts of the world. I think one of the national security implications of some emerging technologies, indeed some technologies that have emerged, such as the internet, is that we're seeing new forms of insecurity emerge. So we've seen recently the hacking of Sony as an example of state-sponsored cyber attacks on a corporate company. Now, that kind of the idea of cyber attacks, of cyber insecurity, of cyber warfare was unimaginable 20 years ago. So there is the potential indeed for new forms of insecurity to emerge. However, it's perhaps in some areas in conventional warfare, some of the potential threats of that are perhaps overplayed. Although after saying that, one of the things that we saw in Afghanistan and Iraq before that was the use of some commercial technologies, including cell phones and so on and so forth, in new ways, underpinning highly lethal and effective IEDs. So there is a potential here.